A woman 8 months pregnant mysteriously disappeared on the eve of Christmas. After the incident occurred, a series of suspicious behaviors raised police doubts. In the year the case happened, public opinion was almost entirely one-sided. But as time passed, more and more people held different views. Some believe the woman's husband is the perpetrator, while others think he's innocent. What exactly happened that day? How many twists and turns does this story have? Today, I'll tell you about a case from the early part of this century, the Scott Peterson case. Laci Peterson's childhood. Laci was born on May 4, 1975 in the United States, in California. Her mother was a gardener. Laci also had an older brother, and the family of 4 lived on a farm in Escalon, California. Laci's parents divorced shortly after her birth. Her mother took her and her brother to live in Modesto, a place not far from her biological father's farm. Laci and her brother often went to their father's farm to play. From a young age, Laci followed her mother in gardening and gradually fell deeply in love with the work. She dreamed of becoming a gardener in the future. When Laci was young, her mother remarried Ron. Ron treated Laci very well, regarding her as his own daughter. In such a family environment, Laci grew up day by day. She was admitted to California Polytechnic State University, one of the best public universities in California located in San Luis Obispo. Laci majored in horticulture. Scott Peterson, Childhood and Education. In 1994, when Laci was 19, during her university years, she often went to a coffee shop 22 kilometers from school to meet friends. There, she met a fellow student working part-time as a server. Laci fell in love with him at first sight and took the initiative to leave her phone number. The server was 3 years older than Laci, born in 1972 in San Diego. His father was a businessman and his mother ran a boutique store. He came from a wealthy family from childhood and also lived in a blended family. His parents had 6 children in total, and he was their only shared child. Scott's father liked playing golf and always took Scott along. Under this influence, Scott showed outstanding talent. At 14, he could beat his father and became one of the most outstanding teenage golfers in San Diego. After high school graduation, Scott was admitted to Arizona State University, his father's alma mater. Scott joined the school's golf team, but with so many experts on the team, his performance seemed mediocre. Because of this, Scott began to give up on himself. A teammate named Chris was the top-ranked teenage golfer in the nation at the time. He and Scott got along well and often went to bars together, even missing training the next day. Chris's father found out and approached the team coach, worried that Scott would affect his son's future. After investigating, the coach expelled Scott from the team. Scott was extremely dissatisfied and, in a fit of anger, dropped out of the school and transferred to California Polytechnic State University, majoring in agricultural business. Scott had a solid foundation and excellent grades. A professor once evaluated him as outstanding. In his spare time, he worked part-time at a coffee shop. The meeting and marriage of Laci and Scott. Laci was introduced to Scott by friends. She took the initiative to leave her phone number, taking the first step in love. Back at school, Laci couldn't contain her excitement and called her mother, saying she met a man today, the man she would marry in this lifetime. The next day, Scott called and invited Laci to go fishing at sea. Laci had been prone to seasickness since childhood, but since this was their first date, she still agreed. That day, the two established a romantic relationship. 3 years later, Scott and Laci held a grand wedding. In the eyes of family and friends, they were an enviable couple. 1 year after the wedding, Scott graduated from university. The couple opened a bar near the school. Business wasn't great at first, but after some effort, it gradually improved. However, at this point, the couple changed their minds again. They decided to sell the bar and move to Laci's hometown of Modesto to settle down. Modesto is located in Central California in Stanislaus County, a small place with lush vegetation around the city, repeatedly rated as an American tree city. 3 years after the wedding, they bought a 3-bedroom house in a high-end community. Laci found a job as a substitute teacher, while Scott worked as a sales manager for a European fertilizer company. Married life and pregnancy. 5 years after the wedding, Laci became pregnant. During this time, she learned cooking skills every day and carefully prepared a baby's room with a small crib, ready for the upcoming baby. Everything seemed so beautiful, until one day, a major incident happened at home. On December 23, 2002, it was a Monday. Laci, 27 years old, was already 8 months pregnant. That day, Laci went with her sister to the family's hair salon. Every month, the couple would go to that salon. In just one more day, it would be Christmas Eve. Scott told Laci's sister that he would go play golf tomorrow, and near the golf course, there was a farm where he would buy a fruit basket to give to their grandfather as a Christmas gift. During the haircut, Scott invited Laci's sister to dinner at their house, but she was busy that evening and politely declined. The couple left the salon and then bought pizza at a restaurant for dinner. The two returned home. Laci called her mother and chatted about Christmas matters. Afterward, she and Scott turned on the TV and watched a ball game together. The two went back to their room to sleep. The day Laci disappeared, December 24th, 2002. The next day was Christmas Eve. The person who reported to the police was Ron, Laci's stepfather. He said that afternoon, his son-in-law, Scott, called to tell him that his daughter, 8 months pregnant, didn't know where she went. He searched the nearby park for a long time, but couldn't find her. He suspected an accident had occurred, so he reported to the police for help. After understanding the situation, the police immediately sent officers to Laci's home to investigate. They found Laci's husband, Scott, and with his consent, they conducted a simple inspection of the house. The kitchen table was full of sumptuous food, probably the dinner Laci prepared for Christmas. On the table was an open phone book with a lawyer's phone number. On the washing machine, a dirty rag was found. At the door, there was a mop and a bucket. The side door rug was rolled up, looking like someone had just cleaned the house. In the closet, Laci's bag, some keys, sunglasses, and other items were found. The house looked normal, with no signs of forced entry, and the doors and windows were undamaged. The police questioned Scott. At first, he said he had been playing golf all day, but later he changed his statement. Scott said he got up to make breakfast, while Laci continued lying in bed for a while. At that time, Laci was doing housework. The home computer record showed someone used the computer to check the weather report and browsed 2 shopping websites, viewing some products. Scott said before leaving home, he saw Laci had just finished cleaning and was sitting on the sofa watching a cooking TV show. Laci said she would go out to walk the dog later, then go to the store to buy ingredients to prepare for Christmas. Scott said before leaving, he took 3 umbrellas from the backyard, and placed them on the back seat of the pickup truck. He wanted to put the umbrellas in the company's warehouse. When leaving, he also met a passing neighbor and greeted them. Scott arrived at the company warehouse. This was where the company stored fertilizer, and Scott would also store some personal items there. He put the umbrellas in the warehouse and then went to his office to handle some work matters. The company computer records showed Scott replied to some emails. After handling work, Scott returned to the company warehouse. That day, he originally planned to play golf, but found the weather a bit cold, so he decided to go sea fishing instead. It was a good opportunity to try out the fishing boat he had bought recently. So, from the company warehouse, Scott took out the fishing boat, fixed it to the back of the pickup truck, and then drove to a place called Berkeley Marina. On the map, this is Scott's home location, and this is the Berkeley Marina location. The two are over 130 kilometers apart, taking about an hour and a half by car. Scott arrived at the marina, bought a boat ticket at the self-service machine, and then drove the fishing boat away from the dock. Scott handed the receipt for the boat ticket he bought at the time to the police to prove this. After going out to sea, Scott sailed north to a nearby island. There was a sign on the island saying no landing. It was a shallow water area. Scott had checked that place online in advance. It was suitable for fishing. After arriving at the planned sea area, Scott started fishing, but he forgot the new fishing rod he bought in the car, so he used the old one. An hour later, seeing the sky darkening and it looking like rain, he returned to the dock. He called Laci, but the call didn't go through and was transferred to voicemail. Scott left a message. On the way home, Scott called Laci several times again, but the calls weren't answered. Scott put the fishing boat back in the company warehouse and then returned to the office to handle some things. He returned to the front of his house. At this time, he found Laci's SUV parked on the road. The house door was enclosed, Laci wasn't home, and the pet dog in the backyard had a collar around its neck covered in mud. He thought Laci might have gone to her mother's house, so he went to the bathroom to shower. Afterward, he also put his clothes in the washing machine to wash. He called his mother-in-law to ask if Laci was there, and the answer was no. Then he went to the neighbors to ask if they had seen Laci and went to the nearby park to look. During the search, he called his mother-in-law several times. Half an hour later, his father-in-law, Ron, felt something might have gone wrong and called the police. After getting these clues, the police proposed to go to the company warehouse to check the fishing boat. At first, Scott refused on the grounds that the warehouse had a power outage, but under the police's insistence, he agreed. This is a diagram of the warehouse. Here is the warehouse's main door. Next to it is a small door. Most of the warehouse space stores fertilizer. The fishing boat's position is here, not far from the warehouse's main door. The police arrived at the warehouse and simply looked at the fishing boat, but didn't find anything unusual. Due to Scott having inconsistent statements before and after, the police found it suspicious and took him to the police station. During the questioning process, Scott seemed quite cooperative. He said he and Laci had been married for 5 years and hadn't had any conflicts recently. He didn't know where his wife had gone. But the officers always felt something was off. During the process, Scott appeared very calm without any sense of anxiety. One officer recalled afterward, "The police naturally didn't believe Scott's statement, so they proposed a lie detector test. Initially, Scott agreed, but later, for some reason, he refused. The police questioned Laci's family. They said Scott and Laci had a good relationship, and they hadn't seen any conflicts in daily life. They believed Laci's disappearance had nothing to do with Scott. The police also questioned nearby neighbors. Someone claimed to have seen Laci walking the dog. Another female neighbor said she saw Scott's dog wandering alone outside with a collar on. Fearing the dog would get lost, she took it back to Scott's backyard. Another neighbor said while walking his dog near home, he saw a dog with a collar appear on the lawn. The two dogs played ball together at the time. He knew it was Scott's dog and later took it to Scott's backyard. Initial investigation and suspicion towards Scott. The day after Laci's disappearance, the police teamed up with the local fire department, deploying helicopters and police dogs to conduct a large-scale search in the local mountains and forests. They also sent water rescue teams to search nearby lakes and oceans. Laci's family printed a large number of flyers and distributed them locally, hoping knowledgeable people could provide clues. A pregnant woman 8 months along disappearing naturally attracted attention from major media. They followed and reported on Laci's disappearance incident. The case became a big deal, attracting more and more attention. Everyone wanted to know where Laci had gone and if she could return safely. For this, the police held a press conference. According to their judgment, Laci couldn't have left alone without notifying her family. She might have been taken by someone or trapped somewhere due to an accident. The police would search with full effort. Some local volunteers organized people to search, and the search team once reached thousands of people. Laci's family established a rescue command center at a local hotel to coordinate personnel and collect useful clues. The police and Laci's family offered a $25,000 reward, which later increased tenfold to $250,000. Public attention and new discoveries. On the third day after Laci's disappearance, the case continued to ferment. Major media sent reporters to stake out outside Scott's house. The Laci disappearance case had become a huge stir. Scott refused all media visits. He said he was a private person and now just wanted to wait quietly at home for news, not cry in front of the media. On the 7th day after Laci's disappearance, the Modesto police station received a police report call. The caller was 28 years old, a single mother working at a massage parlor. She told the police that a month before the Laci case, she met a man at a bar. That man was none other than Scott. At the time, he said he was single and pursued Amber. Soon, the two became lovers. Amber said recently a friend showed her a news article about the Laci disappearance case. Unexpectedly, she saw Scott in the newspaper. After understanding the whole story, she felt very scared and didn't know what to do, so she made this police call. Amber continued that after dating Scott for half a month, he admitted he was married but had just lost his wife. This would be his first holiday without his wife. Scott also said before Christmas he had to go on a business trip to Europe and would spend Christmas in Paris. So during that time, the two didn't meet. The police thought this was a very important clue, increasing Scott's suspicion. With Amber's consent, the police installed a recording device in her phone to record their conversations. On the 8th day after Laci's disappearance, that evening, the family held a vigil for Laci. Many people, including Scott, attended the event. But during the event, Scott chatted and laughed with some friends without showing much sadness. Not only that, he even called his lover Amber. Scott told her he was near the Eiffel Tower in Paris. The surrounding scenery was very beautiful, and he really wanted to return to California to be with Amber. And this conversation between the two was fully recorded by the police's device. On the 14th day after Laci's disappearance, the the police suggested Amber take the initiative to call Scott and confront him. Amber did so. On the phone, she said she already knew Scott's identity. At this time, Scott didn't know the call was being monitored. He admitted he was Laci's husband, not in Europe, and had lied to Amber. During the call, Scott said many sweet words to Amber, trying to stabilize her emotions. Amber asked Scott on the phone if Laci's disappearance was related to him. Scott denied it. He didn't know why Amber would ask such a question and didn't want Amber to get involved in this matter. If she didn't believe him, she could go to the police. Amber's press conference and public pressure. A month after Laci's disappearance, the police took Amber to hold a press conference. Amber publicly admitted her lover relationship with Scott. After the press conference, public opinion exploded instantly. Some people's attitudes towards Scott underwent a 180-degree turn, especially Laci's family. They originally trusted Scott very much, but later began to suspect Laci's disappearance might be related to him. Under public pressure, Scott finally agreed to accept media interviews. He said on the third day after Laci's disappearance, the police had subtly told him that Laci's chance of survival was slim and to prepare psychologically. The media reports helped in searching for Laci, but the search effort was already sufficient. The case's attention was already high and didn't need excessive publicity. Scott admitted to having an extramarital affair and said before Laci's disappearance, he had personally confessed the affair to Laci. At the time, Laci wasn't angry, thinking it didn't affect the couple's marriage. Based on the clues currently mastered, the police suspected Laci had been murdered, and her husband Scott was the prime suspect. They found Scott and proposed a plea deal. As long as he revealed Laci's location, he could avoid the death penalty. But Scott firmly denied any relation to the case. Checks showed Scott had no criminal record, was enthusiastic and cheerful, but after marrying Laci, besides Amber, he had several other affairs. The couple's relationship was far from as good as it appeared to outsiders. House search and evidence discovery. 2 months after Laci's disappearance, the police applied for a search warrant from the court. Search personnel conducted a carpet-style search of Scott's residence. During this, they performed a luminol test, but showed no blood reaction. Police dogs also didn't smell any unusual odors in the backyard. A search officer went to the baby's room. Besides a crib, there were 3 office chairs and some bedding. After Laci's disappearance, the police had entered the baby's room once, and at that time there were no office chairs or bedding in the room. Scott had said in a media interview that after Laci's disappearance, whenever he came to the baby's room door, he felt an inexplicable sadness in his heart, so he hadn't entered the baby's room. Now, items appearing in the baby's room meant Scott had lied. A week after Laci's disappearance, Scott sold Laci's car and bought another one. He even showed intention to sell the house. Psychologists thought Scott's behaviors meant he clearly knew Laci would never come back. Scott usually liked to store some personal items in the company warehouse. Shortly after Laci's disappearance, the company warehouse lease expired. Scott told the landlord he would clear out all personal items within a month. Scott rented a storage unit in his personal name and then put some office supplies, furniture, etc. into it. Since the rented unit wasn't large, it was almost filled up. Other items were taken back home by Scott. The office chairs and bedding in the baby's room were stored at that time. The fishing boat Scott used for sea fishing that day was a small 15-horsepower boat equipped with some fishing gear, including 2 fishing chairs, a trolling boater, and a fish finder, among other items. Scott bought this boat from a man just over 2 weeks before Laci's disappearance. Scott used the recently bought fishing boat to go sea fishing. The police conducted a thorough search of this boat and indeed made discoveries. investigators found 2 hairs on a pair of pliers on the boat, confirmed the hairs belonged to Laci. In addition, a cylindrical anchor made of cement was found on the boat. On the door of the pickup truck Scott drove that day, a blood stain was found. Testing showed it belonged to Laci. The police had sent police dogs to search, and the dogs smelled Laci's scent at Berkeley Marina. During these 2 months after Laci's disappearance, Scott went to Berkeley Marina multiple times for unknown reasons. At this point, based on the clues, the police made a major inference. After meeting his lover Amber, Scott began planning to make his wife Laci disappear completely. He bought a fishing boat to kill Laci and then drive the boat to sea to sink Laci to the bottom. Scott called his lover Amber to tell her he was married, but had just lost his wife. The reason he said this was because he had already planned everything and was just waiting to implement it on the eve of Christmas. The police, with questions, found Scott again for questioning. He liked sea fishing very much. His first date with Laci was sea fishing. The recently purchased fishing boat was his 4th one. He didn't hide it from anyone. Laci knew about him buying the boat. Afterward, he always stored the boat in the company warehouse. Scott said in the media interview, he indeed said he hadn't entered the baby's room, but putting things in the baby's room happened after that interview, so he didn't lie. A female employee at Scott's company said 4 days before Laci's disappearance, she had seen Scott's wife Laci come to the company warehouse. At that time, the fishing boat was in the warehouse. Laci should have known about the boat's existence. 3 of Scott's friends also told the police that before Laci's disappearance, Scott had discussed buying a boat with them multiple times. The computer records at Scott's home also showed he had visited boat-related websites multiple times. The above suspicions of Scott were all based on speculation. If Laci could be found, it might help solve the case. Discovery of the bodies and Scott's arrest. 4 months after Laci's disappearance, a couple walking their dog in a park near Berkeley Marina accidentally found an object floating on the water in a swampy area. The 2 approached and saw it was a full-term baby boy. Panicked, they immediately called the police. The police arrived at the scene and saw a full-term baby boy floating on the swamp water, already deceased. His neck had a nylon tape around it, and there was an obvious wound on his body. The umbilical cord was still attached. 1 day later, 1.5 kilometers away from the baby boy, a decomposed female torso was found. The head and limbs were missing. The lab confirmed through DNA comparison that the woman and the baby were Laci, who disappeared 4 months ago, and her unborn child. The medical examiner examined the 2. When the baby was found, the umbilical cord was still attached, the other end in an irregular, torn shape, not like it was artificially cut. Laci had 2 broken ribs. Due to severe decomposition, the exact time of death couldn't be determined. The medical examiner judged that the baby died in the mother's body and then naturally slipped out. The location where Laci was found was near Berkeley Marina, close to Scott's fishing spot, and even indirectly confirmed the police's earlier inference. Scott's suspicion was infinitely increased. Investigators installed a tracker on his car. Through the tracker, they learned Scott was in San Diego, his parents' residence, and also a U.S.-Mexico border city. Worried Scott might flee to Mexico out of guilt, the police immediately launched an arrest operation. 4 days after discovering Laci, that day Scott was driving on the road when he suddenly noticed cars chasing him from behind. Scott saw this and immediately accelerated to escape. Chasing him were the police conducting the arrest. After a period of pursuit, the police finally forced Scott to stop. At this time, they found Scott's natural brown hair dyed blonde. In his car, they also found some changes of clothes, camping equipment, 4 cell phones, some medications, $15,000 in cash, and his brother's driver's license, among other items. Scott explained the items in the car were because of media harassment. He had been living outdoors recently. His brother's license was used the previous day at a golf club in San Diego to enjoy local discounts. The reason he didn't stop when seeing the chasing cars was because he thought they were media vehicles. The police naturally didn't believe Scott's explanation, thinking he intended to smuggle to Mexico from San Diego. Subsequently, Scott was formally arrested by the police on suspicion of first-degree murder. The trial and prosecutors' arguments. The occurrence of this case caused a huge impact locally. Due to media reports, public opinion had already shown a one-sided situation, subjectively believing the perpetrator must be Scott. To ensure a fair trial, the case wasn't tried in Stanislaus County, where Modesto is located, but was transferred to the neighboring San Mateo County for handling. In June 2004, the case opened in San Mateo County Superior Court. The prosecution presented to the jury how the defendant committed the crime. On the evening of December 23rd, after the couple returned home, Laci finished calling her mother, and then Scott murdered Laci. Then he hid Laci in the company warehouse. Afterward, he thoroughly cleaned the house. The next morning, Scott went to the company warehouse again, took the fishing boat and Laci to Berkeley Marina. Then, he used 4 cylindrical anchors made of cement to tie to Laci's body so it wouldn't float to the surface. On the day of the incident, Scott returned home, took a shower, washed his clothes, and there were rags and buckets at home, signs of cleaning the scene. After Laci was found, Scott dyed his hair blonde and went to San Diego, where a series of essential living supplies were found in the car. This was seen by the prosecution as fleeing out of guilt. Scott's motive for the crime was that Laci was pregnant and he didn't want to be bound by a child. He didn't want to be a father. Additionally, he didn't want Laci to know about his extramarital affair. After being with his lover Amber, when questioned by her if he had a wife, Scott admitted he did but had just lost her. At that time, the idea of making Laci disappear arose in his mind, so he immediately bought the fishing boat for the crime. In Scott's confession, after going sea fishing that day, he returned because it was about to rain, but meteorological records showed it didn't rain at all that day. In Scott's confession, the last time he saw Laci, she was on the sofa watching a cooking show. But that show's broadcast time was the day before Laci's disappearance. Every time Laci went out, she would wear jewelry, but these jewels were found at home. A prosecution witness, a hydrology expert, said if Scott sank Laci at the fishing location that day, the sea currents would carry her to the discovery location. Police dogs also smelled Laci's scent at Berkeley Marina. There is evidence that after buying the boat, Scott made 5 cylindrical anchors with cement, but Scott said he only made 1. Laci's time of death was on the 24th or before. The defense's counter-arguments. The defense lawyer, 46 years old, had defended many famous cases and had rich trial experience. He said on the day of Laci's disappearance, the home computer browsing records showed visits to weather forecast websites and 2 shopping sites, viewing some products. Based on Laci's browsing habits, it was likely her doing it. At that time, she was still alive. This doesn't match the prosecution's inference. Some views think these web records were deliberately forged by Scott. To this, the defense lawyer said when the police questioned Scott, He never proactively mentioned Laci using the computer that morning. If this was forged by Scott, he would definitely proactively bring it up to clear his suspicion. The defense lawyer said on the day of Laci's disappearance, December 24th morning, more than 11 eyewitnesses saw Laci walking the dog near home. This is enough to prove Laci was still alive that morning. This doesn't match the prosecution's inference. The sea area Scott went to that day was a shallow water area, less than 1 meter deep. No one would choose such a place to commit a crime. For this, the defense lawyer specially bought an identical fishing boat and went to the sea area to do a simulation experiment. The results showed that if throwing a body there, the boat would instantly lose balance and the person would fall into the water. 3 days after Laci's disappearance, the police went to Berkeley Marina to search the fishing area Scott mentioned. If Laci was sunk in seawater less than 1 meter deep, the police would have found something. But in fact, they didn't. On the day of the incident, there were many people at Berkeley Marina, and several people saw Scott. If Scott carried Laci onto the boat, it would be easy to be discovered, but the police didn't receive any related eyewitness reports. As for the prosecution saying Scott hid Laci in the company warehouse and then transported her to the car, all this is empty speculation. According to company computer records, Scott was handling emails in the office between 10:30 and 11 that morning. According to the prosecution's inference, Laci was in the warehouse or in Scott's car at that time. If this case was done by Scott, he should be very worried about Laci being discovered and would want to dispose of Laci quickly rather than calmly return to the office to handle emails. Additional evidence and alternative hypotheses. The prosecution countered the evidence raised and proposed another hypothesis. Then they called prosecution witnesses to testify. Diane was a resident near Laci's home. She said on the morning of the incident, she saw Laci walking the dog on the street. In addition, on the lawn of a house, she saw 3 suspicious men standing, with a van parked nearby. When she looked at the 3 men, they turned and stared at her. The owners of that house were an elderly couple who went on vacation the day before and returned home on December 26th, the day after Christmas. After returning, they found their home burglarized and reported to the police. 8 days later, the police arrested 2 burglars. They admitted to the burglary, but their confessions showed the crime time was 6:30 a.m. on the 26th, not the 24th as eyewitness Diane said. However, on the 26th, 2 days had passed since Laci's disappearance. At that time, media heard the news and came to wait outside Scott's house, some even camping nearby. A reporter claimed he was staking out outside Scott's house from 5 a.m. on the 26th. If there were people on the nearby house's lawn at that time, he would have seen them. That day, he didn't see anyone on the lawn. Notably, the 2 burglars committed the crime as a duo, while eyewitness Diane saw 3 people. Whether Diane's statement is true is unknown. To this, the defense thought on the day of the incident, Laci was walking the dog near home and accidentally discovered the burglars, leading to a conflict. The angry burglars subdued Laci, took her onto the van, and later threw her into the sea. Trial progression and verdict. The trial proceeded to this point, seeming each side had its reasons, making the 12 jurors present very difficult. They had trouble judging. Then, the prosecution provided an hours-long phone recording between Scott and his lover Amber. In the recording, as a husband who just lost his wife, Scott used sweet words to deceive his lover Amber time and again. Nothing like what a husband who just lost his wife would say. This recording became a crucially important piece of evidence. In March 2005, after deliberation, the 12 jurors had a result. The San Mateo County Superior Court announced the verdict in this case. Defendant Scott Peterson guilty of first-degree murder. He also had to pay $10,000 in funeral fees to Laci's family. After the sentencing, he was transferred to San Quentin State Prison, one of California's oldest prisons holding nearly 700 inmates. In this case, the prosecution didn't find any direct evidence, but formed a chain of evidence based on a series of indirect evidence to convict Scott. The key evidence that made the jurors convict Scott was that hours-long phone recording with his lover Amber. After the sentencing, Scott didn't plead guilty. His family also believed Scott was innocent. For this, they kept working to appeal to the court, but were rejected due to insufficient evidence. After more than 7 years in prison, Scott submitted a 423-page appeal to the California Supreme Court, listing a series of evidence showing he received an unfair trial. In December 2021, the California Supreme Court overturned Scott's death sentence, changing it to life imprisonment without parole. He was also sentenced for second-degree murder for killing his unborn son with 15 years imprisonment. Modern perspectives in conclusion. Now, 20 full years have passed since the case occurred. As time has diluted people's anger, some people have started to hold different opinions. Before the trial that year, some media began to hype Scott's extramarital affair, leading to a one-sided public opinion. Almost everyone thought Scott was the perpetrator. In such a situation, whether the 12 jurors could make a fair judgment without influence needs a big question mark. Perhaps Scott is the perpetrator. Perhaps not. As for the truth, perhaps only Scott knows.